Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. This is our concepts edition. I'm Devin Bedoni of Like and Precision.
And I'm Uriel Eisen of Austere Manufacturing.
And we have a small announcement. We are going to be updating our release schedule slightly. Instead of 2 episodes per week, we'll be releasing alternate episodes every week. So concepts edition 1 week.
Practice edition the next week.
Yes, exactly.
And this kind of came about, we kind of tested it over the holidays. We're both very busy with our businesses, but also trying to maybe bring a better, like maybe a little bit more content, but also more filtered to each episode to really highlight like more juicy bits instead of just kind of like what we had over 1 week. So hopefully it's a good fit.
Yeah, part of that was driven by me. I feel like, at least in my business, the development cadence is maybe a little slower maybe on some of the things. And so oftentimes we'll be thinking about one thing on a week, implementing parts of it the following week. And I feel like if we're doing this 2-week schedule, we can have a little more time to flesh out those ideas and discuss them fully.
Yeah.
Anyhow, you have a quote. That's a good one.
Yes. Was being curious about things that seem impossible a part of what made him so successful? That was about Isaac Newton in Same as Ever by Morgan Housel. It was talking about his obsession with alchemy, which is sort of considered like his, like the thing. Imagine what he would have produced if he had just spent his time on real physics. And Morgan Housel was kind of contemplating like maybe it is that entertaining ideas that seem impossible that also made him successful at all this groundbreaking mathematics.
Sure. It's not like a sum zero scenario where it's like, well, if he hadn't spent that time on that, he would have spent more time on this. I mean, Einstein has a similar thing where he spent the latter half of his career on a unifying theory, and it's spoken about in a similar way. I mean, it is kind of a bummer because he didn't succeed in unifying relativity and quantum mechanics, I think it was. But it is interesting to think about, like, well, maybe when your brain is built that way, which was very beneficial for humanity, like those are all part of it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What really resonated with me about this, I've been thinking about, what is the business, what is Austere Manufacturing kind of trying to do this year, kind of taking a step back and, where are we and where are we headed? And one piece that really we've talked about on the podcast, but it's kind of keeps coming up is this idea of, are we spending too much time perfecting our processes versus creating new products? And the idea of holding contradictory ideas in your head. And so I've sort of set the goals. Like, I think we need to do both, right? Like we're not doing one. One isn't at the cost of the other. In fact, we could spend that improvement time on our R&D process, on our product release process. Like those feel contradictory, but it seems like there's a huge power in holding contradictory ideas in your head and solving for both, and not just saying, well, that's impossible, so let's just solve for one across the board. And like Toyota has a long history of doing that. Yeah. Right. Like the classic example, I think it was in the Toyota Way, was the laser screw system. Maybe it was I think it was designing the future. Either way, it was like they wanted, they came up with all these benchmarks for new performance characteristics of the cars. A lot of it had to do with center of mass and stiffness of the body. And basically it was concluded that getting the stiffness they wanted from the chassis would require double the tack welds on the chassis, which means either doubling the cost of the robot and welders, because you have 2 of them, or doubling the tack time essentially, or doubling it's not tack time, it would be process time or something like that, operation time,
the cycle time.
in that operation. And so they were kind of saying in the book, like most companies would just abandon that and just go like, well, we can't, it's too expensive, instead of saying, okay, we want that, so how do we get that? And they came up with a totally new way of welding their chassis. Anyway, so
with a laser?
That's what the name implies. I was kind of trying to research what laser screw is. It's a little unclear to me.
Interesting. That's kind of besides the point, though.
Yeah, it's
the point is they
maintained pursuit of two seemingly contradictory things. We don't want to increase our costs and cycle time.
Yeah.
And we want better rigidity.
Yeah.
So let's do that.
Yeah, it's not quite the same, but I feel like this sort of fundamental concept of kind of making things harder to make them easier is something that I keep coming back to as we contemplate processes in our shop.
Yeah.
You have to obviously do the work to then make them easier again.
Right.
But sort of creating friction so that you can remove friction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, doing a group huddle with everyone on the team around some tiny little recurring annoyance seems really silly.
Yeah.
And it's not.
Sure.
But it is a lot of time up front and a lot of head scratching, and everyone's kind of like, what if we just keep going like we've been?
Right. Or even just kind of the things that I've keep coming back to is like, you know, the concept of maybe like putting two things physically further apart from each other. So that you notice the waste of having to move them. And at first you're like, that's crazy. And you're like, well, you won't fix all of this stuff unless you do that. Or, you know, doing certain things that are like, this is absolutely more friction, more difficulty right now.
Yeah.
In order to achieve this longer term goal.
Yeah. I mean, that's like a lot of lean and Kanban specifically is exactly that. It's like, how do we develop a tool to stress the systems?
Yeah.
So that we can do it at will and not just wait for the market to demonstrate the flaws in our system.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, I have a few things, a few interesting things I've kind of been contemplating. Some of them are more surface level, like practical things, maybe easier to jump in there. We've been trying to figure out SOPs.
Yeah.
I think the need is becoming more and more obvious to me. But like the nitty gritty tools to build them is not that obvious. So we've landed on a solution that I think is pretty good. I know Joe at Cobra Frame Building has done a bunch of this, and they seem to be working well for him. But basically using Google Slides, which I think I mentioned.
Yeah.
So we've been messing with that more. I downloaded the app on my phone, and then Sam did the same. And what that enables is you can quickly go through and create new slides on your phone and snap the photos directly instead of like taking photos, putting them in a folder, downloading, uploading, whatever loading.
Yeah.
And so that's been pretty good. It's not at all. It sucks to then go add text to it. So then we've been jumping over to desktop to like add arrows and text and kind of just clean it up. And that's our current workflow.
And does it goes, it's like a slideshow in that you can sequence things specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's that aspect. There's a few nice things about it. One is it's free, which I don't think is necessarily always a good way of picking a software.
Sure.
But it is free, which is nice. Then there's also, what's it called? Presenter notes.
Okay.
So associated with each slide, you can type a whole bunch. There's like an area to handle just a bunch of text, whatever you want.
Yeah.
And when you print that, you can select whether that shows up or not.
Okay.
And so the cool thing there is we can make a presentation that's how to do a particular thing, like change the trash bag or whatever.
Yep.
And then in the notes, we could have like links to the different products.
Oh.
Not as a way of reordering them necessarily, but like, this is a dumb example, but let's say we break our trash can. It's like, well, which one did we get?
Yeah.
So you can sort of store a lot of extra information in there. The other thing is like reading about SOPs. It seems like Toyota has 3 types of SOPs, right? There's the displayed ones that are sort of for the operator. There's the displayed ones that are not for the operator, that they're for anyone walking by can make sure that things are happening to standard. And then there's the other set that's like super in depth.
Yeah.
That includes like why the decisions were made and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So it just seems like that's sort of a space for that to exist, because right now we're not going to create 3 documents for each thing. Maybe we'll get there.
Yeah.
But so that's a nice place to maybe stick some of the reasoning in, right?
Just to have layers of the document.
Yeah, that don't display. So I think that's nice. And then lastly, the printing tool is pretty good, where you hit print and then you can select how many of those slides get printed on each page. Anyway, so that's sort of where we've landed for now. I'd love to hear any recommendations or best practices from people who have done it.
And then how are you, that all makes a lot of sense. How are you handling the other end of it?
What do you mean? Like viewing?
Yeah, viewing and making sure that things are being done to them and things like that.
Yeah, I'd prefer to not talk about that. Still, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna have to figure that out. Right now we have some have QR codes, like some stations have QR codes, which is great, but only for training, really.
Yeah.
Or like I get on a station that I don't typically do, and it's like, how do we do this again?
Sure.
That's not that useful, because really the power of the SOPs seems to be iterating, right? Like I see Sam doing it and he's not doing it to standard, and it's like, oh, why aren't you doing it this way? And he's like, oh, because of this thing. It's like, great, let's go update the SOP, and now I am doing it the same way, and it's better, and it's so easy for each person to be doing things slightly differently, and presumably one way is the best for a particular reason.
Sure.
Either it's most ergonomic or it's least prone to error, or right, like there's layers.
Balances the different things most effectively.
Yeah, and so it would be very useful to everyone kind of be forced to do it that way. We've kind of talked about that. So I think we really need to print them and prominently display them at each station. Mm-hmm. You've seen our shop. That's going to be kind of tough.
Right. Yeah.
Like, it's just small.
Yeah.
So I don't really know. Anyway, we haven't really figured that out, but.
Yeah, I mean, you could have, it starts to cascade with cost, but if you're going to eventually have terminals at stations, you could have it so that like that lives up at the terminal kind of a thing. Yeah.
I think, so something I've noticed, we have some text-based SOPs, which are kind of useful, but they are displayed. I never refer to them.
Uh-huh.
And even when I'm going back to a task that I haven't done in a little while, I'm not really... looking, like I don't read it because it's not quick enough, but I would totally glance up at an image. And so I think a terminal would work, except that like typically that's going to have a few SOPs associated with, like, one terminal it's not going to be a terminal per process.
You mean per operation?
Per operation, yeah. I think
it could be, but that's then getting a little crazy.
Well, also if we have the space for that, we could also have the space for probably some images. I don't really know.
Yeah, maybe. Well, I'm just thinking like versus having to like shuffle through a stack, it could be like an actual slideshow that you just like watch.
That's true. Yeah, I think the slideshow is more useful for like instructional.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, stay tuned.
Yeah, that seems like a lot of these things are very easy to make and very hard to effectively enact in the space.
Totally. And make sure everyone's actually, it's like, why did we bother making that document?
Yeah.
Because we haven't looked at it in 3 months.
Yeah. A lot of our stuff is it's sort of defaulted to more just like reference for when you forget.
Which I think still is extremely useful and worthwhile.
It's still very useful and definitely helpful.
And I think is one of the easiest things to push off. To go like, oh, we'll deal with that later. And you see this all the time in all sorts of companies where someone leaves and then everyone's like, what the hell? They did a terrible job of like handing off their work. It's like, well, maybe you did a terrible job as an organization of building that documentation into the process.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Trying to find that balance.
Yes.
But it is helpful, I've found, when things go wrong and you go back and it's like, did we do all these things? Why not?
Right. And like I've found a few times now where it's kind of like we have an issue and then we kind of go, oh, here would have been the way to solve that problem. And then there's nowhere to write that down.
Yeah.
And so that's really frustrating. And we're not kind of going to stop everything. Well, maybe we should. I don't know.
Right.
But probably not going to stop everything every time there's some little note and it's like, where do we document that? And so at least with SOPs on every process, we could kind of just go like, okay, here's where we're sticking it. Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's the hope. I think it's going to be a major work in progress and going to learn a lot of things about what we did right and wrong.
Yeah. Interesting.
Anyway.
Cool. Do you have more on that topic?
I think we had this as a quote, but there is no improvement without standard work from,
right.
I forget, some Toyota exec.
Someone important.
Someone important who we should trust to know. And yeah, I think we've been seeing that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obviously an exaggeration because we have made a lot of improvements without standard work, but I think the point still stands.
Yeah, totally. Well, I had an interesting experience of sort of applying kind of like what you were talking about of the difference between like pull and flow.
Yeah.
With CAM programming.
Oh, interesting.
So a week ago, before the holiday, we had a bunch of parts to get out. They were all pretty much like single unit or couple unit. So
okay.
Lots of setups, lots of programming.
Mm-hmm.
So I was doing all the programming. 3 people were setting up and running machines. And, my knee-jerk or most people's knee-jerk reaction would be, okay, this is a family of parts. I'm going to, program all of them while I have sort of this open and in the zone. And I was like, well, if I do that, 2 of these 3 machines will end up idle because they will starve for programs.
Interesting.
So it was down to the point where it was like some of this became verbal communication, not like through our normal systems, but be like, okay, this program's going to be ready in 20 minutes. Here's here's what JAWS, here's the basic setup. By the time you have that ready,
oh, very cool.
We'll have the program over to you and you can start cutting JAWS and stuff. And then it was like, okay, I'm going to hop over to this other machine, get them first operation ready so they can start proofing that.
Right.
Go back to the other part, get the second operation for that part done, or whatever the case may be. Some of them were not multiple ops, but basically trying to like feed in real time based on which machine was going to be available next. Down to the minute instead of like days. Yeah,
and you're like all the information was just in time, essentially.
Pretty much.
And you were able to have a lot more throughput by not batching, even though there was increased inefficiency because you had to keep essentially changing your setup, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Much
lower efficiency on my end, theoretical efficiency, but the overall efficiency of the shop was much higher. I can't remember what it was exactly. I think we wrapped up a couple part numbers that had started the day before, and then I think we did 8 complete. I think we did 8 part numbers complete start to finish that day and shipped and everything.
That's wild.
Which was cool. I don't think we've ever done that before.
That's pretty daunting.
It was very exciting. And that was even with some things going wrong. So I was like definitely seeing that if you could figure out that flow.
Right. Always.
Yeah. Again, it was kind of coming back to like you were having like, sort of this
like expediting
sort of emergency mentality, but at the same time applying the principles, and it really worked.
Well, so what's funny to me about that is, I mean, that is mostly viewed as negative, right? Like most people look at that and go like, wow, that was really intense. How do we make sure that doesn't happen again?
Yeah.
Instead of saying like, wow, we shipped more parts than we have ever shipped before. Like, let's maybe figure out a less intense version of that, but still like that's where we should be headed.
Yeah.
I think it's Shigeo Shingo basically talks about like people optimizing for security, because if any part of that breaks, you suddenly have like 2 machines idle.
Yeah.
Instead of the certainty of being like, wow, we have 3 programs done. Tomorrow, everyone has work to do. Mm-hmm. But you're just turning out fewer parts per day.
Yeah. And I think sort of applying Kanban principles, I think there is a world in which you do that same sort of shuffle.
Right.
But you do fill a buffer so that when things go wrong or somebody's sick or whatever the case may be, everything doesn't grind to a halt, but also maybe not.
Yeah, at the same time, like things grinding to a halt isn't bad if you're turning out like 3 times the amount of work as the option where everyone's not like everyone's just comfortable. Right. Like if you were producing 8, if you were like start to finish 8 parts per day.
Yeah.
And then one day you produced 1 part because everything kind of like ground to a halt because you had a few issues, you're still way ahead of the alternative. And everyone is on board for fixing those problems.
It's true. Yeah.
It's like, all right, this needs to not happen again.
Right. And none of you are working important on parts right now. So let's fix this.
Yeah. Interesting. That's cool. It's always fun to see like real world examples of batching being worse than single piece flow.
Yeah.
Because it's so counterintuitive.
It really is. It was cool.
That's very cool. All right, I have a little one. In-station quality is a big focus where people talk about, you should never pass a defect on to the next station. And that all sounds great. And it is incredibly important and useful. And we are definitely seeing a lot of issues around that we need to solve. And we're working on it. But I had a bit of a funny thing the other day is like, because that is the concept, I feel like that's been where my awareness is, where it's like, oh, we're passing defects to this station from that station. In-station quality says we shouldn't. Let's fix that. But then, I don't know what to call it, like intra-station quality. Like in the station, are there tools that create defects that then get reworked? So I found one. Every time we wrap a strap to pack in an order, we have like a drill with like 2 little pins on it that spins it up really quick. Every time we post videos about it, people are like, oh my God, that's amazing. Meanwhile, it's like the simplest thing there, but people really like it. Anyway, it is very prone to creating defects, which I haven't really just, I guess, looked at as like, this is a defect until now, but it winds it like all the layers of webbing aren't totally 100% stacked one on top of the other, right? They're like slightly offset and sometimes like slightly in one direction. So it's sort of like a little cone. And then the next step is you take it off, you do this quick little hand shuffle thing that we've all gotten very good at. And then you put it in a bag, and that's totally flown under the radar to me of like, that's just how the process works. Yeah. And the other day I was doing it and I was like, wait, why am I having to, like, I just wound this. Now I have to fix the winding. Maybe we can just make this process not create defects. Yeah. So anyway, I guess you could also spot that issue through the lens of like the 8 lean wastes, one of them being like rework. So there's other ways of spotting it. It was just funny. It's like not only in station quality, but like every single process should be handing good parts every time to the next one. Yeah. And I think the problem arises, here's another example. We just got an automatic webbing cutter. Yeah. And we have to rework every single cut. And it's a huge improvement over how we used to do it, in that the quality of the part is much better and the time is like, it's faster. So all in all, it's better, but I think already that's baked in to the whole team as like, yeah, this is how we do it. It's part of the, we're experts. Yeah. And it's not like, hey, this is a great next step. this still is not good. Let's make sure this stays like in our awareness as something where there can be substantial gains of like, and I think this is the part people forget about. The fact that that's now baked into the process on the webbing cutter means that we are really far away from actually just cutting to order. Mm-hmm. Because it's like, well, it's annoying. You have to cut them. Then you have to refinish all the ends. And so we batch them. Mm-hmm. And if anyone said, well, what if we just cut them to order? Those would be all the complaints. But the second you reduce all of the friction, mm-hmm. there's just no reason to batch.
Yeah.
And we just see that time and time again. So anyway, it's tricky, but it's very easy to just get used to how things are done and not look at them and go like, we're reworking every single one. So it's on my list.
That's cool.
Let's see. Keep banging along here. So on the topic of, and I think we sort of touched on this at the beginning of the conversation, but holding two ideas in your head simultaneously. The big ones for the company this year, I think, are improving and releasing new products, keeping those all together. So I don't know. It's sort of funny. The quote, you don't have priorities. If you have more than 3 priorities, you don't have priorities.
Yeah.
Really is coming to mind when I'm sitting down. Like, I don't know what to do about the, like, where is the business going?
Yeah.
You sit down and think about like the things that need to happen this year. And it's like, oh, everything all right now. And which should happen first. And it's like, all of them.
Yeah.
All of them should happen first. So anyway, I'm kind of a little bit stuck on coming up with like real goals for each quarter, because realistically they're not all going to happen.
Yeah.
And so I'd rather proactively plan that than just be like, mm-hmm. see where we end up.
Yeah.
And that will all be good, but it doesn't mean it'll be the best option. So
yeah,
it's funny. It's way easier to just go with the flow and try to do our best.
It is, yeah.
And it's like, we do a good job. Wow. We
right.
must be smart and clever.
Yeah, I had kind of a counterpoint to that. I feel like the last couple months we really slowed down a lot.
Uh-huh.
I'm still trying to pick apart exactly what happened. I think it was many faceted.
Okay.
But not a small part of it, I think, was like kind of getting focused on improvements to a large degree with more people and new space. And
mm-hmm.
okay, let's do this.
Yeah.
And production really suffered. And now we're sort of dealing with the effects of that.
You hit like improvements too hard, you think, is one aspect of it?
I'm not exactly sure, because like we haven't actually gotten a lot of them across the line. But I do think we put a lot of energy into thinking and starting some of these things, and just sort of shifting priorities. And now I think I'm having to be like, oh, actually we just have to make parts for a little while,
right,
in a certain way. Not like we aren't going to improve things and we're still working on stuff, but it was just an interesting just like that idea of holding contradicting ideas. I feel like maybe we lost sight of part of it for a short time. And I'm having to kind of at least I did, and having to get my head back in the game a little bit.
Oh, totally. I feel that after the time away.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, back in the shop. Have to do the things. Interesting. Yeah. I was just having this conversation around like all the goals for this year. Mm-hmm. And the reality is if we pursue all of them right now, we'll run out of money and time. Like we don't have enough time to like make them all happen. And we don't have enough money to cash flow all those things. Yeah. And so you do have to stage them out. It's funny. I mean, all the improvements you were talking about are like really useful and great, but simultaneously, if you just do improvements, like you got a business. So
and we didn't even necessarily get a lot of them done. So I'm a little confused about what all happened. Mm-hmm. But yes, the point stands.
Yeah. So here's a funny one for you on that topic. We did an improvement this morning, which was running air to where we cut down the pin stock. Mm-hmm. we used to take the air from the sandblasting cabinet, pull the hose across the shop, plug it in, and we've been doing that for longer than I'd care to admit. Finally, I was like, all right, we're just going to do this. So I shut the valve off so that the compressor wouldn't, so it would just fill the tank. And then we started the process of plumbing that in, and inevitably it took like 40 minutes to find everything and get it all, whatever. And I was kind of thinking, like, we 100% could have had all of that attached and just not done the final hookup to the shop air. And it's just, it's hard to do that somehow, right? You just want to like start and finish. And on the side of starting and finishing would be like reduced WIP.
Yeah.
Like, to your point, starting a bunch of projects and then not finishing them is like the worst. It's just, you've invested a lot of time and money, energy, and then you don't get to benefit from it. On the flip side, it feels like that runs into the idea of like 80% planning, 20% execution. Like, I have another good example of the 80% planning, 20% execution. I jumped into like some bookkeeping stuff, and I got this like very nasty spreadsheet downloaded. And so I was like, all right, well, I'm just going to go through it and delete all the irrelevant data. And then I got like 20 minutes into that, and I was like, this is really long. This doesn't really make sense. I started scrolling through it. Turns out it had downloaded like all the years instead of just 2023. And so then I like deleted, first I sorted by year, deleted, I don't know, 90% of the document. And then it was way quicker. So if I had planned a little more and thought harder about like, what am I trying to, like, looked at the data, figured out like, what are we trying to do here? I would have been way ahead.
Yeah.
But also, like, I don't know, staging out improvements so you're kind of realistic about time and they don't disrupt production, right? The core function of the business. Yeah. Well, I guess Toyota would say it's learning is the core function of the business.
Survival is the core function of the business.
There we go. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, so I have a few projects like that. I want to move a light switch, and my temptation is, all right, like this morning, let's just leave that breaker off. Let's get in there. But I know the second I open up the wall, it's going to be a little different than I anticipate.
Sure.
And so maybe I should just open up the wall and have a look and like, plan on looking, making a list of what we need, procuring all that stuff, having it sit right there.
Did you know, apparently you can buy these switches now.
Okay.
They're Bluetooth.
Huh.
So you put in effectively a 3-way switch. Like, you could have a 3-way switch.
Fascinating.
In quotation marks. Where your current switch is, that switch, no, you don't run any additional wiring.
Right.
That switch connects to this other switch via Bluetooth that just has a battery in it.
Interesting.
And so when you flip the other switch, it'll actuate that one.
Maybe that would be a better way of doing it.
It would be faster, probably.
Yeah.
Better is arguable. But
that is probably true. Yeah. I think it'll be fairly easy because, famous last words, because, well, I don't need to get into it, but basically I think the wires run right by where I want the switch. And so I should just be able to open the wall. There they are. I'm going to turn off the circuit, pull the wire back from the other one, put the switch in over. You know what they say about assuming. Exactly. And so I haven't just opened up the wall to have a look.
Yeah.
And the temptation is to like stop production. Let's get this done. And then we'll keep going with production instead of kind of staging it out in a least disruptive way.
Yeah.
So hopefully we can get a little better at that this year. And also being more proactive about like, where is this all headed? I don't know if you've had this, but I was reviewing our end of year purchasing to not pay tax. If you're going to do spending, you might as well do it in this financial year. Yeah. And I'm kind of looking at all we spent, which was not zero. And it feels like I didn't have, like, I don't think it was frivolous by any means, but it doesn't feel like it was laser focused on like moving the needle on like, what is the company trying to do? Do you know what I mean?
I do. Yes.
It's like you can buy some brooms, which are nice to have, and some vacuums, which are going to keep things cleaner. But it's like, there should be targets that we're just, I mean, okay, management by targets has its issues.
Sure.
But like kind of goals for the company. That's like, here's where we're headed.
Addressing the bottleneck at the very least.
Yeah, exactly. Or like we want to, double our revenue this year, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
What are the 5 things that will get us there?
Yeah.
And how many of those dollars were spent directly on that?
Yeah.
I don't know. So I feel like I need a little more.
Yeah, that's
planning.
a good lens.
But it gets really overwhelming so quickly.
To parse it, you mean?
Yeah, to break it all out. And here are all the goals. How do we... and like, I don't know. Here's one. We want to move. We want to buy another machine. Buying another machine is sort of the... not the goal, but...
Yeah.
We want to increase our throughput.
Yeah.
And we want to hire. We're not going to do all those things this week. But in what order do we do them? And then you can come up with a plan, but there's also the reality of like which presents itself, right? Like when do we meet someone who would be a good hire?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, all right, well, we just met someone. Let me reshuffle that order a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like strategy meets opportunity or something.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And at this scale, it's like a little bit harder maybe to create the opportunities that you want. Like you kind of have to take them when they arrive.
Yeah. Or do you? I don't know. Is that just an illusion? Right. Like you can post job listings and be very proactive about generating leads.
Yeah. But you don't have the same like gravity as a large company, right? So like the likelihood of you getting a stellar hire is maybe different than like 3M, right?
Could be.
Like 3M posts like an engineering position, they're probably going to get a lot of good applicants.
Right.
And you also might get some stellar applicants, but it feels a little more unpredictable.
Yeah, and I think the really established channels for making hires, and maybe this is totally incorrect, but it feels a little bit like they might attract a different type of person than would be interested in small business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I had a friend who was trying to hire someone, and this was an interesting conversation around like equity, which I don't think you've used to incent like.
Oh, equity in the business?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he offered someone equity, and they were basically like, well, I'd rather have cash.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a small business, and that's kind of like a major problem, right? Like they need to be bought in. They need to be like, yes, I can see how my involvement in this company, I mean, for the level he was hiring, he wasn't hiring someone to like sweep his floor.
Yeah.
Right. He was hiring like a
CFO or something.
Essentially, right. And so someone like you almost want that person to turn, like you almost want them to need to take a pay cut and take equity from their current position, because otherwise it's like you're not actually bought in, you're just doing this as
it's just a job.
It's just a job, and that is totally fine for people to just want a job, but also there are some roles where you want someone who's gets the vision and all that.
Fully invested.
Yep.
Or at least partially. At least a little bit invested.
No, I think that's real. Like that was a thing people talked about in startups, is like people need to be willing to take a pay cut. And that's not to say you can't hire someone at a salary, like at a market rate, but it's just like understand what is appealing to someone, and you want to filter out the people who aren't going to be a good fit.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway.
That makes a lot of sense.
On that note.
Yes.
Time to wrap up.
Indeed. Thanks everybody for listening. Hope you all had a good break, if you got a break, and a good end of year, and good luck in the new year.
Yeah, write in with some of your new year goals for your business.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
And the improvements you plan on making.
Yeah, and how you're going to address the bottleneck, most importantly.
Yeah, and how every dollar will go toward that.
If you wouldn't mind sending us a flow chart, that'd be great.
Yeah, you can find the podcast at Incremental CI on Instagram. Please write in and tag us in improvements. It's fun to see what people are up to. You can find me at austere_manufacturing on Instagram and austeremfg.com on the internet.
You can find me at lichenprecision.com on the internet, lichen_MFG on Instagram, and check out our Patreon when you have a free minute.
Indeed.
We'll talk to you soon.